Shabbat Shalom, and this is Shabbat Va'era, not to be confused with Vayera, a parashat from Bereshit. This is the Hebrew word for "and I appeared," the first word that God speaks in Shemot chapter 6. Here's the scenario for this week's parashat. And begin by thinking of yourself in Moshe's place. God has decided to send you on a mission. You must confront a despot, a deified ruler of the most powerful kingdom on earth. Returning to the land from which you have been exiled for 40 years, you must win the trust of a nation of slaves, convincing them to follow you. And finally, you must lead them, all of them, more than, as it turns out, 1 million people, in a massive escape, managing to move them from the land that they were in safely across a body of water while thwarting the advances of the king and his army. Not a small task. You might want a few moments to consider this proposition, and you might want some assurances to encourage you before you accept this mission. You might want to know exactly how this will play out. Why, for example, will anyone listen to you? Whether the slaves, your own people, or the king? And what are your chances of success? In response to your concerns, God offers you what might seem a sort of amateurish conjuring trick. God tells you that if you cast your staff to the ground in front of Pharaoh and his court, the staff will become a serpent. You are not told that Pharaoh will then have his magicians, who will be able to do the same trick, actually act in this way also. And it has been noted that this practice even continues today with snake charmers, and Moshe may have seen it himself in Pharaoh's court while he was growing up. Well, the staff is going to be able to consume the Egyptians' staffs, but this is small consolation for what could appear to be a very insignificant sort of sign. Of course, this is nothing compared to what lies ahead. Moshe doesn't know that. And although God does offer Aharon to assist Moshe, Aharon, his older brother, at no time does he suggest that Moshe really has a choice. So why did the all-powerful Master of the universe offer Moshe such an ordinary little trick? Considering the 10 plagues that will soon follow, why didn't God provide Moshe with some truly significant proof of his great power? Have any ideas? Well, maybe just maybe, this is supposed to lull Pharaoh into a false sense of security. The contest between Moshe and the magicians of Pharaoh's court doesn't really indicate much. But what if God's intention is to lure Pharaoh into this false sense of security, to draw him into a contest that God knows he can't win? Why? For the purpose of proving himself, not only to the Egyptians, but to Israel. When Pharaoh's magicians had finally had enough, they declared, "This is the finger of God." Shemot 8. Ultimately, the infinite power of God was revealed for everyone to see. This was about substance rather than showmanship. The magician may have the ability to misdirect, but really that's all he has. God demonstrated power over all things, from the beasts to the skies. The basis of our faith is who God is. Human magic is self-directed and self-aggrandizing. We are told in Pirkei Avot, align your will with God's will. Align your will with God's will. And in a sense, that's exactly what Moshe is being told to do. In Mishlei, we read, trust in Adonai with all your heart. Do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. Then he will level your paths. And of course, that's exactly what he did for Moshe and the people of Israel. Now, Pharaoh's response to God actually reflects the common worldview, not only in that day, but today as well. Pharaoh challenged, who is Adonai, this God of Israel, that I should obey his voice? I don't know Adonai. These are the words of a fool. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. In Moshe's day, this was a denouncement of any gods but those worshipped by the Egyptians. And of course, Pharaoh was himself supposed to be an incarnation of the sun god Ra. Today, such a remark is typical of those who call themselves atheists and even agnostics, people who don't need God. There are those who say that no one can know if God exists, and that therefore his existence must be simply irrelevant. Humanists of every description, from modern pagan to Christian or Jew, may believe there is a God of sorts, but they see him in their own image. Perhaps this is the divine watchmaker of the deists and even the theists, the creator who walked away from his creation. Or Mother Earth, the source of all that is good. Most people today do not think they need God, except perhaps in an emergency. Rather the way you need the AA or a qualified plumber. And people often compare deities as they compare washing up liquids. Many share these popular beliefs that the religion they were born into or chose at some point in their lives is adequate. It satisfies whatever religious needs they might have. It's non-threatening. It's comfortable, rather like an old pair of jeans. Or all paths lead to God. Choose the one you like best. He doesn't care if he really exists. The non-religious, which are most people in this country, believe that organized religion is basically superfluous, irrelevant, and even stupid. Humanists believe supernatural events can be explained scientifically. Religion is antiquated. It's a crutch, the opiate of the people, a waste of time, the cause of conflict. It's impersonal and irrelevant. Pharaoh hardened his heart even after he had seen God's power unleashed. This perspective was similar to that of many in the world today, who believe that whatever has happened would have happened anyway. It's absurd to think that God, if he exists, would or could personally intervene. Well, there's no proof of God's intervention. Strange, isn't it, that we still refer to storms and earthquakes and even terrible fires like those in LA at the moment, acts of God. Finally, Pharaoh said that he could almost believe in God, but he still needed just one more proof of God's power. It sounds like others in the scriptures, when confronted with the truth, who said, "I'm almost persuaded." Have you ever known someone like that? The agnostic says it's possible there's a power that's greater than himself, but how can you know for sure? Give me evidence, he says. The humanist assumes that everything can be explained through reason, and thus there's no actual need for a belief in God. Most people think that even if there is a God, and he has some part in everyone's life, he has no right to expect anything of human beings. Finally, though, Pharaoh declared, and these are interesting words, "I have sinned. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked." What kind of admission is that? But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder ceased, he sinned more and hardened his heart, he and his servants. When faced with insurmountable, unbelievable obstacles, almost anyone will admit God's power. And thus, there are no atheists in foxholes, we're told. People will agree to abide by God's requirements even when they need something from him, and he is their last and only hope. Please note, recognition of God and his power is simply not enough. Even Hasatan and his followers know that there is a God, and they know his power. The relationship between God and Pharaoh did not change even when Pharaoh was forced to admit wrongdoing and to acknowledge not only God's existence, but his power and righteousness. Pharaoh made this admission not because of a change of heart, but because he had no choice. He himself did not change in spite of the realization of God's power, of who God was. This is what the scriptures say about those who rebel against God. What is revealed is God's anger from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who in their wickedness keep suppressing the truth. That's an interesting statement. They keep suppressing the truth. The truth is there, but they suppress it. What is known about God is plain to them, for ever since the creation of the universe, his eternal power and his divine nature have been clearly seen because they can be understood from what he has made. It's as simple as that. If you see something that exists, somebody obviously created it. They have no excuse because although they know who God is, they do not glorify him as God or thank him. On the contrary, they have become futile in their thinking, and their undiscerning hearts have become darkened. Claiming to be wise, they've become fools. In fact, they've exchanged the glory of the immortal God for mere images. This is why God has given them up to the vileness of their heart's lust, to the shameful misuse of each other's bodies. They have exchanged the truth of God for falsehood. It's a choice. God promised judgment upon Egypt. Yechezkel's prophecies about Egypt, circa 587 to 585 BCE, were made nearly 1,000 years after the events in the book of Shemot. From Egypt's position of great power during Moshe's lifetime, it had fallen in prominence and importance. And when Yechezkel's prophecy was given, Egypt had been temporarily restored to power, but God spoke of further decline. After Persia's rise, Egypt became a Persian satrapy, a satellite. It was then dominated in turn by the Greeks and then the Romans, the Mamelukes, and finally it became a province of the Ottoman Empire. Modern Egypt is composed of a different people group altogether. At the time of Cleopatra, for example, Roman period, Egypt was ethnically Greek. It's not also the same nation today in structure or boundaries as in the days of the pharaohs. Egypt's relationship with Israel is also foretold by the prophets. Since the time of the Exodus, Egypt has been a constant enemy, except during Solomon's reign. He married a daughter of the Pharaoh in order to establish better diplomatic ties with Egypt. Of course, they didn't last. Egypt urged Israel's rebellion against Assyria and Babylon in the ongoing contest between the empires of the Nile and those of the Euphrates. This was always to Israel's detriment. Yehuda repeatedly sought Egypt's support for her rebellion against Babylon under kings Hezekiah, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. Prophets Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu condemned Egypt, and Yechezkel predicted that Egypt would be powerless, useless to Israel in time of need, which indeed has always been the case. Here's a brief historical account of Egypt's history. Pharaoh Necho of the 26th dynasty managed to defeat Nebuchadnezzar in 505. His grandson, Pharaoh Hophra, was able to besiege Tyre and Sidon, but was unsuccessful against Cyrene and finally deposed by Anasis in 569. In a prophecy given 7 months before Jerusalem's destruction, a message is presented for Pharaoh Hophra and all the people of Egypt, and indeed the land of Egypt. Pharaoh is symbolized as a crocodile, which of course was worshipped by Egyptians as seen on their coins. Pharaoh as a god claimed to have brought the Nile, the source and support of all life in Egypt, into existence. In fact, the Nile made him and Egypt what they were. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote of Hophra that he thought himself so powerful that no deity could displace him. God declared that he would take this monster, again, the crocodile, by hooking his jaw so that he and his people would be food for wild animals. A horrible end for those who prepared so elaborately for death and the afterlife. And God declared the reasons for judging Egypt and her king. Pharaoh's inordinate pride and self-deification denied the one true God, although Egypt had every reason to know and believe in him. Egypt broke her covenant to aid Yehuda and deceived Yehuda with false promises. We're told that Egypt would never again be a powerful ruler of nations, although Abdul Nasser in the 50s and 60s attempted to lead the Arab world and regain the greatness of Egypt. Egypt is an example of those nations who have many opportunities to recognize the one true God, but refuse to do so. God said Israel would cease to look to Egypt for support. Instead, Egypt was to be a reminder of the consequences of rejecting God. One of the roots of Pharaoh's perspective on God was not only his pride, but also the hardness of his heart. Hardness of heart is unbelief. Perhaps you think it's only the godless who harden their hearts against God. Yet, the Bnei Israel, having seen God's power in Egypt, still questioned his ability to deliver them from Pharaoh's army and did not trust him to provide for them in the wilderness. With all of God's provisions, we were still willing to create a golden calf to replace God as soon as we had reason to fear and were left on our own. When faced with the prospect of entering the land that God had promised to us, we refused to go in, and we claimed that God had brought us there to die. We are warned against the disease of unbelief. Among those who followed Rav Yeshua, who spoke with him and observed all that he did and said, many still did not believe that he was Mashiach. Yeshua said of them, "If you had believed Moshe and the prophets, you would have known me." Here's another warning. Watch out, my brothers and sisters, so that there will not be in any one of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Ivrim 3. Someone has rightfully said, the hardening of our hearts is the spring of all other sins, the source of all other sins. It is from unbelief that every other sin gains a foothold in our lives. Pharaoh and Egypt and the lives of the faithless among our people serve as a negative example, just as those who have been faithful to God serve as a positive example. Our people distrusted God, tempted and provoked him, murmured against his appointed leaders. The sources and spring of such sin was their heart's attitude. They did not seek God's ways, even though he was at great pains to direct them by his commandments. Finally, it must be known, sin will be punished. Those who reject God will, like Pharaoh and the people of Egypt, experience divine retribution. Those who have come into a relationship with God and yet persist in hardening their hearts against God's authority and his specific commandments will be disciplined by whatever means are necessary. An evil heart of pride and unbelief is at the center of all sinful departures from God, whatever they may be. Hardness of heart leads to apostasy and alienation from God. The focus of this parashah is the miracle of faith, cultivated in humility and under the guidance of God's clear commandments. Listen to God speaking through his word and through his messengers, and submit to his righteousness and his authority. Move from doubt and fear to real faith by allowing your heart to be softened by God's love and mercy, represented in Mashiach's sacrificial atonement for us. Reject the path of the evil inclination in your life. Consider your thoughts. Thoughts become words. Consider your words. Words become actions. Consider your actions. Actions become habits. Consider your habits. habits become character. Consider your character. Your character will become your destiny. Ponder for a moment Moshe Rabbeinu's mission improbable in the light of your own life. Where do you stand with Hashem today? Consider liminality, from the Latin word limen, a threshold. Liminality defines the quality of ambiguity when beginning a transition. During a liminal state, one stands at the threshold. Grasp the grace of liminality. Stop worrying about the past or the future, but instead fully hold on to the present in the knowledge that God is present with you. Be mindful of and take pleasure in simple things, sharing time with Hashem, with loved ones, with friends, and with those in your shul. Our journey here in the life that God has given us continues as we wait for Tikkun Olam. This means literally world repair, when God, not human beings, will renew us and our world, and we will see him face to face. Let our waiting be, in this liminal space, a prelude to eternity with him, one of fullness and joy, not based on thinking we know what will happen next or what we can control, but on the knowledge that God will be present with us each moment of every day through all the moments of time and space. Praying that you will have a blessed Shabbat and a good week ahead. Shavua Tov.